And everyone, please join me in welcoming to the stage Meg with LanzaJet.
Thanks, Mitchell. Snag that. Hi, everybody. How are you?
Yeah.
Good. Already still awake? Okay. All right. Well, so great to be with you all today. My name is Meg Whitty. I am a native Iowan, grew up here, but my company is LanzaJet. We make sustainable aviation fuel from ethanol. And so I know this is a very well-informed audience about sustainable aviation fuel, but I'm going to give you just a big overview on why it's so important and so valuable and such a huge opportunity for the agriculture industry. A little bit of background on kind of my history. My first job out of high school, out of college, was working at the Department of Agriculture here in the state of Iowa and then in Washington, D.C. at USDA Rural Development, working on Title IX of the Farm Bill, helping farmers, rural small businesses get access to funding to help grow biomass, to get access to renewable energy. And then from there, went to United Airlines, where I worked on a Midwest Sustainable Aviation Biofuels Initiative. So have been working in this space, in the biofuel space, since 2008, so a better part of 17 years, but a little bit more on my company, LanzaJet, and what we do coming up here. But LanzaJet is a sustainable aviation fuels technology company. We're based in Illinois, in Deerfield, Illinois, north of Chicago. We have the world's first ethanol to jet fuel plant here that I'll talk about in a second. But right now, with sustainable aviation fuel, there is a huge opportunity, and we're at an inflection point for both agriculture and aviation. Aviation as an industry has committed to being net zero by 2050. That is a massive, massive target. But today, aviation accounts for 10% of global emissions. It is a critical means of connection and commerce. We're not going to stop flying. Also, batteries are far too heavy to be on planes, so we're going to keep using fuel for the foreseeable future. The industry is always going to continue to grow. It is growing very quickly, and we're not going to stop flying. So where does SAF come in? There are a number of ways that aviation can decarbonize. The most significant, accounting for between 65 and 70% of how aviation is going to be able to decarbonize, is through sustainable aviation fuel. Other ways are through efficiencies in technology, offsets, market-based measures, but SAF is the most significant way that aviation is going to reduce its carbon emissions. So what is SAF? I think this audience has a pretty good sense of what sustainable aviation fuel, but reduces carbon emissions significantly on a life cycle basis, upwards of carbon negative, believe it or not, depending on your source of carbon. We've already flown 450,000 flights using sustainable aviation fuel. It is a proven technology. It is drop-in ready. You don't need to change any of the infrastructure for aviation, so pretty significant and meaningful. A lot still needs to happen, but the industry really is demanding and asking for sustainable aviation fuel. It's growing. There are more and more government regulations globally saying, hey, we want sustainable aviation fuel, and it is an ideal substitute today for petroleum-based jet fuel. So what does this mean for the market? A study recently was done showing the growth potential for sustainable aviation fuel over the course of the next 5 years has the potential of growing to a $20 billion a year industry. And that's a compound annual growth rate of 60%, which is incredible. So the opportunity is massive. And our technology, which I'll get into a little bit more, is ethanol to jet. So huge opportunity, and also a huge opportunity in time for U.S. agriculture, right? We've seen the trends going the wrong direction over the course of the last 10, 15 years. And so what I'm here to talk about a little bit today is this immense opportunity that both the ethanol to jet technology has, but in general also the other technologies around sustainable aviation fuel, because it is such a massive market. Similar to what the renewable fuels standard did, 20 years ago. We're coming up on 20-year anniversary, and Jeff Cooper had a great article about this recently. SAF has the ability to do similar things for the agricultural industry. So huge opportunity for rural America, huge opportunity for agriculture. Airlines, OEMs like Airbus and Boeing and others and airports are wanting to buy sustainable aviation fuel. The biggest problem today, there just isn't enough of it. So there's a huge supply issue. All of these airlines have already, and over 50 worldwide, right, have already purchased and flown flights using SAF. So it is very much a real technology today. It is a massive market. 100 billion gallons a year of sustainable aviation, or of aviation fuel is used. SAF accounts for 0.3% of that today. So last year, 340 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel was produced. So think about that delta over time is huge. Again, global interest in alcohol to jet and in SAF in general. Sort of this is kind of some of the headwinds and the tailwinds that we're seeing across the world. North America, Europe, Australia, Asia, all growing significantly and very strong demands, and developing in other parts of the world. SAF policies, right? You're seeing not only incentives, but mandates globally saying we want SAF. This year is the first year in the UK and in Europe, they're mandating that sustainable aviation fuel be used as a certain percentage of the fuel used in aviation. This is continuing to be a trend. The United States, obviously you've heard about 45Z, 40B before that was a great incentive for sustainable aviation fuel. I'll talk a little bit about 45Z, but a lot of good things have already been said on that. Some issues with it, I think some good terms. I appreciate the muddled mess reference that Paul made. There's good opportunities, but there's things we can continue to improve on. Also, what we're seeing for sustainable aviation fuel, states are doing a great job. Here in Iowa, just recently, we've passed some incentives that are fantastic. This is going to be really important as LanzaJet thinks about siting our next plant in the United States. We already have the world's first down in Georgia, and we'd like to build another one here. What we're seeing is these state-based incentives, whether they are tax credits for producers or tax credits for purchasers like airlines, super important in terms of how we think about where we site these plants. So here are just a few states that are already putting incentives in place to support the growth of sustainable aviation fuel. The renewable fuel standard also has incentives for, through the RIN market. Lots of opportunities here with sustainable aviation fuel, both at the state level and then hopefully at the federal level. Again, really great opportunity for rural America. There's a theme here. Opportunity for rural America and agriculture when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel. Okay, so what is alcohol to jet? So ethanol to SAF, or alcohol to jet, opportunity is massive in the United States and around the world. Our technology can take any source of ethanol and convert it to low-carbon jet fuel. There's a huge amount of feedstock. The state of Iowa, the United States, and the world produces a huge amount of ethanol today, which is why this technology is really important in order to both take advantage of the market today, but then also, hopefully, right, the future growth of that market and the demand within the industry. Not only does it help from an environmental standpoint, but it provides energy security, economic security, national security, all of these things, rural economic development, job growth, super important. The world produces 30 billion gallons of jet fuel a year. The United States, 17 billion gallons. Iowa, 4.5, right? We're the state that produces the most in the country that produces the most in the world. Global jet fuel demand, 100 billion gallons a year. So for sustainable aviation fuel to have this type of base to go from a feedstock standpoint is massive, but we have to be able to access it. A to J has significant growth potential. The only other technology out there today that's commercialized is HEFA technology, so hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids. But we're going to see some growth limitations with HEFA. So, I know Kyle's going to come up here and talk about his company and what they're doing. So great to see more engagement. There's a lot of opportunity here. One thing we're seeing with A to J is there's a huge growth potential. And this is where you all come in and the opportunity for ethanol to be able to take advantage of this market as it continues to grow over the course of the next 50 years. So who is LanzaJet and what do we do? We were founded in 2020 during the height of COVID by a number of companies who saw the opportunity for aviation as aviation was making commitments to decarbonize. And so we have been funded and supported by these companies here. You'll recognize a few of them, but all committed to the growth of this type of technology and in order to decarbonize the aviation industry. We were first to market to receive the approval for the alcohol-to-jet technology. We have the world's first ethanol-to-jet plant that we built in Soperton, Georgia, coming online right now, down in Soperton, and that is a 10 million gallon a year facility, so I'll talk more about that in a second. But one of the great things about ethanol-to-jet is the ability to take the available ethanol today and continue to grow. We've flown the first A to J commercial flight in 2018. So that was a transatlantic flight from Florida to London. And then we flew an ANA delivery flight from the state of Washington to Japan. So again, proven technology. We're based in Deerfield, Illinois, but we have projects around the world, from the United Kingdom to the EU to India to Australia. The world is moving forward on sustainable aviation fuel. And we have obviously our project down in Georgia, but more to come on that. So our plant in Georgia, it's a 10 million gallon a year facility. So our technology produces 90% SAF, 10% RD, but we can flip it to 75-25 depending on sort of market-based opportunities. But that facility has contributed significantly to the community there. 300 direct jobs during construction, 30 to 50 direct jobs during ongoing operations. So significant for a community of 3,000 in Soperton, Georgia. And that's where we will continue to sort of build many of these plants. $5 million a year in wages and $70 million in annual economic activity. And that's just one plant. So we're working to accelerate the growth of the sustainable aviation fuels industry and doing it through a number of different ways. Our platform is versatile. So one of the great things about biofuels, it is a very local industry, and you can work in any type of, you can work in any type of technology, whether it is, or any type of feedstock rather. So whether it is corn, or if you're working in Australia, different ag residues, the UK, we're working on a project that we're bringing online here soon called Project Speedbird, and we're using woody biomass waste. So again, it's a very local industry and opportunity. So one of the things, again, about sustainable aviation fuels, there's a huge opportunity here for both the United States and the world. And what I would say is, at this point, it's ours to lose. We have such a huge volume of ethanol in this country. Right now, the way the regulations are written, companies like ours can't access all of the ethanol that's available because the carbon intensity for corn-based ethanol is too high the way the current regulations are written. So what we very much believe is there should be performance-based measures to help bring that delta down so that we can access the corn and that we can continue to partner with folks who are continuing to improve their carbon intensity scores to ensure this market can continue to grow. So lots of opportunities there. This is our plant down in Georgia and the opening last year. What I would say is it takes people who are really working hard, and we like to say it takes dreamers and it takes warriors to get this done. Building new industries are very difficult. Continuing to find ways to work with regulations as they exist today is very hard, but we believe in it and we're doing it. And as we like to say at LanzaJet, we don't have to wait for someday to get this done because someday is now. So, all right, that's it. I think I'll pass it back over to Mitchell. Thank you all very much.
I think extremely, I've seen multiple of these SAF conversations stuff now over the last couple of years, going to as many conferences as I go to. And it's always just intriguing to me of this massive, massive opportunity. And we heard about it a little bit last year. For those of you who were here, we had Southwest Airlines here last year. They're an investor in the LanzaJet facility, so it was great to hear them speaking on behalf of the airlines, and now this year to be able to get some of the producers in. We've got another of those producers with us here today. This is Kyle with BioVeritas. He's going to talk about their technology, some of the things that they have going. I connected with these guys just a couple months ago, and they're like, hey, how do we help promote the push for more soil health practice adoption and lowering the carbon intensity of the feedstocks? I'm like, well, that's what we're doing, and hey, we got this event. You guys should come be a part of it. So I'm excited to have you guys here. Kyle, without further ado, I'll let you take the stage. And like I said, after this, we'll take a couple questions and we'll keep the day rolling. But everyone, please welcome to the stage Kyle from BioVeritas.
Okay, thank you, Mitchell.
Here's a clicker.
Yeah, that would be good. Okay. Let me figure out how to work this thing first. My name is Kyle Ross. I'm the VP of Process Development at BioVeritas, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you, Mitchell, for inviting us to be here with you. So when you agree to be on a panel like this and you end up finding out you're second, you sort of have a little fear that you're going to follow a great speaker and she's going to cover all your points. She was a great speaker, covered most of my points, but I'll try to highlight the ones that are still pertinent to us. So at BioVeritas, we like to say that we are SAF unconstrained, and we'll explain that as I go through this talk. Meg covered a lot of these topics already. Aviation fuel is a major CO2 emitter, and that sort of that fraction of the global CO2 emissions is expected to grow over time as other industries are able to decarbonize. And they can decarbonize in ways that you just can't do on an airplane. So on an airplane, batteries don't work. Hydrogen is always 10 years away from being a viable solution. And so a drop-in liquid fuel is really the only way that you can make these things, you can fly an airplane. So people want a solution that'll go in the same tank and burn in the same engine. And Meg pointed out that HEFA is the current dominant technology for producing SAF. And she rightly pointed out that there is really the feedstock for HEFA is fats, oils, and greases. So either waste cooking oil or animal fats or soybean oil. And there's just really a limit to how much of that you can do. And as the demand for SAF grows up, it's going to quickly cross the available supply of feedstocks for the HEFA process. Otherwise, the HEFA process is really a pretty good technology. The chemistry is simple, high yields. It's really an evolution of the renewable diesel technology. You just add in a couple more chemical conversion steps to get it ready to go in an airplane, and it's good to go. So at BioVeritas, I guess our purpose, our mission statement is that BioVeritas can unleash unlimited growth by unlocking more feedstocks using less energy to deliver a more cost-effective SAF. And so we are SAF unconstrained. Well, that got messed up a little bit, but I'll try to explain that. Our technology is, I'll sort of go through the technology and explain what we're doing, and I apologize for the graphics. They got messed up a little bit. But there's really three main steps in our technology. The first is the directed mixed culture fermentation. And so it's pretty well known that mixed culture fermentation has the ability to take a variety of feedstocks from sugars and starches, such as you can get from corn, along with fibrous residues, such as the corn kernel fiber or corn stover or wheat straw or other ag residues, and can convert those into volatile fatty acids, which is sort of analogous, not the same chemical, but similar chemicals, just an intermediate in the overall SAF conversion process, like you have with alcohol in the alcohol-to-jet process. So the mixed culture fermentation produces the volatile fatty acids, but it's really a wide array of volatile fatty acids, and you put the directed on top of that. That's really a key piece of our technology. We're able to direct the production to the specific volatile fatty acids that are most useful in producing SAF. So after that, a lot of people think that fermentation is really the sexy part of all the fermentation or all the fermentation-based processes. But really, fermentation, there's some technology there, but the hard part is getting the fermentation products out of water. With ethanol, it's fairly easy to just boil it or distill it, and you can get the ethanol off top. With volatile fatty acid fermentation, it's a little bit difficult, or a little bit different chemistry is needed. And so we have another key piece of our technology is a low energy acid recovery step that's able to recover and purify the acids in a cost-effective, low energy intensity manner. And so with that, we end up with this nice, clean, intermediate chemical that can then be fed into the downstream chemical conversion process. And in that chemical conversion process, it's really a three-step process. The last two steps are essentially taken directly from the HEFA or the renewable diesel process. So the same chemistry that's going on there. And in fact, we can rely on the same plants that do that step. And then the step before that is another chemical step that turns out to be quite easy, low energy intensity, and really is surprisingly a piece of cake, for lack of a better term. And that three-step process allows us really two routes to making SAF. One, we can implement all three steps ourselves and go all the way to SAF at our own plant. Or second, we can just do that first step at our own facility and then feed that intermediate, which is called ketones, into an already functioning HEFA or renewable diesel plant. And thereby reduce, especially as their feedstock constraints go up, we can we can supplement or essentially replace the fats, oils, and greases that they're currently using now. So, and there's really three parts of our technology. The directed mixed culture fermentation, which allows us to take a wide variety of feedstocks. We have the low energy acid recovery, which allows us to efficiently and with minimal amount of energy recover those acids into a nice pure form, which then allows us to feed into an already established downstream chemical process. And so if you're gonna be in the SAF space, it's all about lowering the carbon intensity. If you don't have a lower carbon intensity, your sustainable aviation fuel is just aviation fuel. It's not sustainable. And so here we show a column chart that shows our carbon intensity versus just the conventional jet fuel made from petroleum. And conventional jet fuel made from petroleum has a carbon intensity of, here's some good old American units, 89 grams of CO2 per megajoule of fuel. So the units aren't that important, but it's a big number. It's represented by the black column there. And then next to that, we have the carbon intensity of our process. The first column, the one in the middle, is the carbon intensity of our process just using regularly farmed corn-based feedstock with no climate smart ag. And you can see we get fairly low there. And we're claiming 4 for our carbon intensity. And so let me explain those numbers real quick. So to arrive at that carbon intensity of 4, you first add up all of the items above the 0 line, and then you subtract the item below the 0 line. That last one is carbon capture and sequestration. But if you look at everything above the 0 line, the yellow portion is the feedstock coming in, and that feedstock is conventionally farmed corn. So above that is sort of the energy requirements or the carbon intensity generated from our energy requirements of processing the corn into the final fuel. And then on top of that, it's a little bit for transportation to the final market. But as you can see, the biggest input that increases our carbon intensity is the carbon intensity of the corn coming in at the plant gate, or the corn product, or corn-derived product that we're using as our feedstock at the plant gate. And so if we move to the last column on the right, you can see even with a conservative estimate of the carbon intensity reduction that you can get with the climate smart ag practices, you can see we can essentially drop our carbon intensity another 18 points. And with some of the these are sort of the default measurements in the GREET model with the software that Mitchell and his company provide. The lower carbon intensities are even more possible, and you can get to an even lower carbon intensity than what is shown here. But really, the biggest driver of our carbon intensity is that feedstock input, and so that's why we're here today, is to really stress the need for the low CI corn into our process. Well, this plot got backwards. Meg already talked about 45Z and the benefit here. I guess the big point to take away from this is that if you start on the left, or on the right side of the plot, essentially you've got 0 there, and so this would be a decrease from the carbon intensity of conventional jet fuel. And so you can see, at least for 45Z, until you get to about half of the carbon intensity of conventional jet fuel, there's no credit for 45Z. And there are other carbon credit systems that sort of follow the same pattern as this. And so with that, once you get to essentially the 50% reduction, you see a fairly steep increase in the 45Z tax credit. And it works out to, you can get up to $1.75 a gallon for 45Z. And so what that represents is potential value that can be shared across the whole supply chain in SAF production, from the farmer to the mill, to us, and then out to the final production. So we see there's plenty of revenue here to be shared if we can just get the carbon intensity of the corn down. And so that's really the point of our attendance here today, is to learn from you guys how hard is it to do that, and to offer support, say, hey, we're looking for long-term win-win solutions, and we think this is a place to go to start those conversations. So our pathway to commercialization, right now we're operating our market demonstration unit in Bryan, Texas, right next to Texas A&M University. That's where the technology was birthed. Actually did graduate research on it back in the 1990s. We are planning our first inaugural plant. It is to be in the U.S. Midwest. The feedstock's going to be unrefined corn-based feedstock. We're planning on 30 million gallons per year of SAF as the design basis for the plant, which will require about 20 million bushels per year of corn input, and preferably low CI corn. And the planned startup is for 2029, early 2029. So at BioVeritas, we do believe we have the opportunity to expand the market for feedstocks, or expand the feedstocks, or expand the market for the feedstocks that you supply. We have a pathway to unlock sort of the feedstock constraints that the HEFA process will soon face, and we look forward to partnering with you guys. And also, I want to thank you for your attention today, and I do look forward to learning more from you guys about.
So, Kyle, you said you guys are going to build your plant here in Southeast Iowa, is what I heard, right?
Yeah. I think there's plenty of room.
We're working on trying to convince them. But so obviously very interesting stuff here on this whole SAF conversation. A huge opportunity, and Kyle, you were just kind of hitting in on it as well. And for all of you guys, be sure to text in your questions. I got a whole bunch of them. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the 20 minutes or so that we got. But Kyle, you were just talking about the farmer piece a little bit, trying to understand how does the climate smart practices tie in, and how could this be kind of shared. And I'll come back to you on it, but Meg, what's you guys' current talking points and stuff, or message to the farmer piece of what should they be doing, and how should the farmer themselves be thinking about SAF as part of the strategy for their operation?
Yeah, I think, and it's been a good theme throughout the day, one is just know your data, right? Data is increasingly more and more valuable because of what that's going to mean for you to be able to market a hugely valuable product, and will only continue to get more valuable if we're able to position it right with a 100 billion gallon a year market demand that is sustainable aviation fuel, especially at the same time when you're seeing a demand degradation for ground transportation with the increase of electric vehicles, fuel efficiency. I said it earlier, but you're not going to see planes operating on batteries anytime soon. We'll need fuel. And we're in a really interesting time to be able to position this state, this industry, the U.S. Midwest to lead. We are uniquely positioned to be able to lead in terms of the volumes of ethanol that we create for the world. So it's a great time to be really thinking about how to capture your data and how to continue to find ways we can improve carbon intensity.
Yeah, I think, and Jeff this morning was talking about how, as if we do see a decrease in liquid fuels utilized on the road, well, if we have a higher blend of ethanol, then the amount of biofuel that would still be used in that stays about the same. A lot of conversations I've seen, they showed that decline in the amount of transportation fuel to be used, and the SAF opportunity really being the offtake or the new market that ethanol can go into. If we're not going to burn it in our cars, might as well turn it into SAF and utilize that opportunity. And now it's kind of, well, we need all the above and a combo of everything. Kyle, let me make sure that I was understanding correctly. In you guys' process, are you going to be actually, like at your plant, taking delivery of full kernels of corn and full bushels of corn, or are you guys an add-on to some other type of actual feedstock?
So the first plant, our vision is for an over-the-fence relationship with a wet mill, for instance, and we'll take either starch slurry or a dextrose syrup from them, just as a way to sort of de-risk and decapitalize the first plant. So.
Okay, yeah, so it's tag teaming on with an existing wet mill ethanol plant. Yeah,
just the economy of scale at those facilities is so high that doesn't make sense to do our own grind and all of that.
Yeah, and the CapEx of putting in these type of facilities has got to be just astronomically high. And the payoff has got to be years and years, I have to assume. Now that ties in, we're talking a lot about policy and stuff in 45Z. What are some other key policy pieces that you guys are monitoring? Maybe we'll start with there. What are some key components of policy that's really pertinent right now that you guys are watching closely?
Yeah, I think for us, look, 45Z is definitely top of mind. A to J is in a unique position in that 45Z, the way it's written today, actually hurts A to J. And so we're very much supportive of 45Z, period, in terms of supporting the overall growth of the industry. What we want to make sure is that it doesn't end up creating the issue of what is essentially an opportunity cost and then higher feedstock cost for sustainable aviation fuel. So what happens today is, because both ethanol and the SAF producer are eligible to receive the credit, but not both of them can take it, it doesn't make sense for an ethanol producer to sell into the SAF market and then give up the credit. So that what ends up happening is that we end up having to pay the opportunity cost to the ethanol producer of what they would have received in the tax credit. And so what that ends up happening is we end up raising the feedstock cost for the production of SAF. And so what we're hoping to do is say, hey, when that happens, if the ethanol producer can raise their overall price, right, to compensate for that, charge us more, but then give us the credit so it neutralizes the impact to the overall industry. It doesn't cost any more for 45Z. Ethanol producer gets the same amount of money they would have gotten with 45Z, but we're also not hurt by it. And so that's what we're talking to, the Hill, we're talking to representatives, we're talking to folks around the industry to understand that this is an issue for the growth of the A to J sustainable aviation fuels industry, whereas 40B was very much an incentive. It almost perverts it and sort of encourages us to buy ethanol elsewhere, which is not exactly what we want to be doing. So.
Yeah, you and I have talked about it before, right? And you're from Iowa. You want to see the feedstock being from Iowa, right? But
ideally, yes, I'd love it from Iowa, but just in the United States too.
At least in the U.S.,
yes.
And it's U.S. taxpayer dollars should be kept here. I think we can all agree on that. But Jeff laid it out pretty well before, right? But just to make sure everyone is clear, because I think we've got a role to play, as if we are able to communicate with our policymakers and stuff about this. So if the ethanol plant can earn a 50-cent credit from 45Z, which is what Jeff was saying, by the time you take 1 gallon or 1.7 gallons of ethanol to make a gallon of SAF and the additional carbon emissions associated with that conversion, it went from like a 50-cent credit to like an 18-cent credit or something like that, and then it just doesn't make sense. But so what you guys are advocating for is, hey, let's claim the actual 50-cent credit. Let's keep it as that overall dollar amount, but just be able to kind of pass that through, that you guys claim the credit that would have otherwise been claimed by the ethanol producer, but you guys just basically able to claim it and share in the money with those folks.
So essentially, exactly right, in the sense that the ethanol producer, again, gets the benefit of the incentive, but then we're also not hurt by it. And so it continues to incentivize both industries to continue to grow is what we're advocating for.
Kyle, is that tying on you guys' stuff? Because you're not necessarily if you're tagging on with an ethanol plant, you're not using the ethanol. They're going to use the ethanol, get the 45Z on that. You guys are using basically part of the DDGs and part of the slurry coming out. Does this issue
I don't think that
guys?
affects us in the same way because we don't have that ethanol intermediate. We sort of produce our own intermediate. I think the key things that we like to see in the 45Z is the transferability is a big thing, especially as you're starting up the first plant. We're not going to have much profit to deduct against our from our taxes for a while. And I think also the granularity in the feed input calculation would be nice instead of these sort of catch-all. If you check this box, you check these 3 boxes, you have this CI score. I think the granularity that you keep preaching would be a nice inclusion in that.
Yeah, I mean, we want the full GREET model to be used, right? Not the bundle approach, not just 6 or 7 practices. We want to see a bunch of different things all be included. Let farmers be creative. Let farmers be innovative to figure out what's going to work best for them and lower that CI score, right? And then that should, looks like would tie to you guys' stuff well. How are you guys approaching that? I know right now, you're using mostly Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, right? And Jeff laid that out before in some of how that ethanol is already has a really low CI score.
Yeah.
And so you guys are able to tap into that today, as I'm assuming the cost of the actual liquid fuel itself is about the same as up here, but it's got a lower CI score just by the way that it works. But what are you guys advocating for to be able to tie in this U.S. feedstock instead?
Yeah, look, I think, we're an American company. We want to be able to use, for a number of reasons, right? It makes a lot more sense to use ethanol that's here. We want to be able to use ethanol that's here. Lots of issues today exist. One, the threshold of the 50% makes it pretty tough, too. And so one thing we've also been advocating for is how do you build a sort of stepped measure that it's, okay, 10% first year, 20%, 30%, so we can continue to grow the industry in a very practical way without making sort of an arbitrary cutoff. So that's one thing. Two, from a U.S. standpoint, we would much rather use U.S., and we are actually using today U.S. corn ethanol as we go through the startup of the plant. The problem is, in order to sell it, in order to get the credits, and then also qualify internationally, we have to use the EPA only has one pathway approved for sugarcane. So that's one issue. Two, you have to hit the 50% threshold, which makes, corn ethanol, in most cases, extremely difficult. And so, again, a number of different things. The other thing from a policy standpoint I mentioned earlier is states are doing a great job. More and more, Illinois has a producer or a purchaser's tax credit. You're seeing many states across the Midwest creating producers' tax credits. When you can stack all of these incentives, which makes it really important for these first-of-a-kind industries to just get going. And so that's really important as we're proving this technology out and building economies of scale to get the industry off the ground.
Yeah, and so that's right, as you're looking at those feedstocks, right, it's got to get creative to tag into something like what BioVeritas is doing or what LanzaJet's doing. You got to find low carbon SAF, which means it's probably got to have carbon capture already, which reduces the CI by 30 points. And hopefully it's got the climate smart ag practices in there, the low carbon intensity practices that we've seen would reduce the CI score an average of about 18 points. And then you stack those together. Now we're talking significant CI reduction. Now this stuff can work, but it's got to get policy to be able to drive that. Is that kind of tracking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing too to mention is you have places like Europe that have said we will not allow you to use any ag-based products in sustainable aviation fuel. You can use it on ground transportation, but you can't use it in aviation, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And we're actually part of a lawsuit that's pushed back on that. But it's been really difficult because it's really important to get the industry going and then continue to improve. I sort of joke, right? Edison didn't invent an LED light bulb. You can't start with sort of jumping 10 paces, right? You have to start where you start, and we have to find practical ways to continue to improve. So
as both of you guys are looking now at expanding new plants and stuff, how are you looking at where should we put this? What's the strategy there? What are those conversations like? I assume it's around, okay, where can we get the right feedstock and low carbon feedstock, and the carbon capture piece I assume is part of it, but maybe delve into that a little bit more on like how are you guys approaching, hey, we need to expand, we want to build a SAF plant. What is that conversation like to be able to choose where to go? And Meg, you can maybe speak to why'd you guys end up in Georgia for yours?
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, happy to take that. So for Georgia's a bit unique. One, in that Savannah is the second largest port on the East Coast. So huge opportunity from that perspective in terms of fuel movement. We were able to, with our partner who already had an existing site, lease the site. So there were some good opportunities there. We're pretty close to the port of Savannah. Good existing site. So that was unique for Georgia. That facility is a 10 million gallon a year facility. It's a commercial scale demonstration unit. So again, we're learning a lot. Our next facility will be orders of magnitude larger, right? And so for that, you really have to take into account, like, it's money, right? For these first-of-a-kind facilities, it has to make economic sense. And so that's where these state-based incentives are really important, and where you're seeing movement and where you're seeing companies willing to take these risks. It's bringing down those overall risks from an insurance standpoint, from an investment standpoint. We're very fortunate to have investors in this space who are really committed to growing this industry. Major organizations like Shell, like Suncor, like Mitsui, all of these big, huge conglomerates, and then airlines are really invested in this space. So having these partners very intentionally, right, across the entire value chain that have come in to say, we care about this, but that also have given more than capital. So that's a really important thing as well. You have people who are advising not only on how to build these refineries, how to operate these refineries, how to invest, how to connect with ethanol, logistics, all of these pieces super important as we think about how we site our second plant and what's needed. So whether it's, right now we're looking at this second plant here in the United States, and does it make more sense in the Midwest based on new state incentives, looking at where airports are doing more to incentivize the use of sustainable aviation fuel. Minnesota's doing a great job when it comes to SAF. Illinois is doing a good job. You're seeing great progress out of other states across the Midwest. All of those things really matter when it comes down to how these first-of-a-kind plants are going to be able to be operational, because as you said earlier, these first-of-a-kind facilities are not massive revenue generators. And so it's proving technology to be able to reduce the overall risk to get these second and third-of-a-kind facilities up and running.
In BioVeritas, you were talking coming in with your first plant being 30 million gallons, right? A little bit larger. But I think the industry is just maturing a little bit. You're a couple years now beyond too, but you're talking 2029, 4 years away to be able to do this, which I'm assuming by the time you permit and start building, it's going to be a long process. That's probably going to come here quick. But how are you guys approaching, where should you put it? What's that thought process like?
Since we are relying on the essentially the wet mill feedstock, or potentially a modification to a dry mill, we're really tied to those locations for the most part.
Is there a bunch of those, or what? So in the U.S. there's about 192 ethanol plants. Do you have off the top of your head how many of them are wet versus dry? I don't know that.
I think most of the ethanol plants are dry mills, but there are plenty of wet mills that go into making corn syrup and all the other sort of the food ingredients. And so we're siting closer to those facilities. Also the ability for, I guess, the capacity for those facilities to bring in low CI corn that can be transferred in some way to our balance sheet, more or less. I guess we showed our sort of how the carbon intensity stacked up in our process. And I'm really quite proud as an engineer that we've squeezed the carbon intensity of the transformation part down as small as it can be. And for an engineer, you just sort of, the number is the most important thing. But that really does translate into dollars. Yeah. And so if we can lower that yellow section, lower the feed input, that really is a big input into our model too. And also the ability to do carbon capture too. Yeah. I mean, it's not a necessary, we can get below the 50% threshold without it. But it's tougher to do without it.
Yeah, I would think it'd be very helpful to be able to have the carbon capture piece, to be able to position with that. Obviously, a lot of policy discussion to be had there. A quick follow-up one, and Meg, you may know, as we're looking at the different state stuff, Iowa's been making progress on our state deal. Did something actually get signed by the governor? It was
unless something's happened today, I don't think anything's been signed.
I saw something a couple weeks ago.
But it did pass through the legislature. So I'm sure somebody in the audience can correct me. I think it's 20-25 cents per gallon, and then there's also an early stage investment tax credit to build the actual facility. So those are all really good things and helpful. That's actually a fair amount lower than many other states, which are at about $1.25 up to $1.75. So I think great progress. Happy to see any progress. Would of course like that to be a little bit higher, but again, look, I think the tide is going the right direction, which is great to see.
So if Iowa's credit's going to be 25 cents, Illinois is $1.25. Well, you're probably going to build on that side of the river, right? That's basically the nuts and bolts of it.
It makes it hard to argue that. Yeah. So.
What is the question come in from the audience? What is the difference in cost right now between a gallon of SAF versus a gallon of Jet A?
Yeah.
Do we know what that is? Right?
It depends, but it's about an order of 2 to 3 times higher today. Okay. Yeah.
SAF 2-3 times higher. And a gallon of Jet A right now is it $3 a gallon or something? Or
it's higher than that, and I have to check what it is today. But yeah.
But by round numbers, figure 3 something, maybe $4 a gallon on Jet A. Call it close to $10 on SAF. Correct. That's why all these policies are so important to enable that. Do we? And policy obviously is super important for this, but is it make or break, or is there enough interest in the airlines that even without policy, you guys are still no, this is still going to happen regardless of policy, or is it no, we've pretty well got to have the policy, or else it's just going to continue to be fossil fuel?
I'd say policy is a great accelerator. 45Z, for instance, or these other state tax credits are not the only driver of the value in the SAF production chain. So It sure does help. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but it's just we're competing against the oil industry that I live, 90 miles from Houston. The amount of oil that goes through the Baytown Exxon refinery is, it just dwarfs anything you can imagine here. And 600,000 barrels per day kind of throughput through a facility. That's probably that ends up being close to the annual output of your SAF plant in Georgia. And so you've just got, until we can get to capacities anywhere near that size, it's just going to take a little extra help and a little extra incentives.
Yeah.
What I would say on the policy side, and what I think good incentives do is get industries started so that they can go off on their own, right? You don't want them lasting forever, but they've got to be durable enough to help the industry get off the ground. And when it comes to make or break, I actually do think the policies are make or break for early stage companies, early stage industries to get going. Do I think it's 45Z, is it make or break for the entire SAF industry? No. But it's also because you are seeing mandates around the world for sustainable aviation fuel. And so what I would say is the sustainable aviation fuel industry is going to continue to grow because other countries are saying, you must do this. It is sort of critical to have done. So what's going to happen is you're going to have companies go, well, if these airlines are having to buy this, then we have a market elsewhere. And so again, what I hope happens is that the federal government and then state governments see this and realize that if we can put these incentives in place to encourage that kind of growth in the United States that's already so well positioned to lead in this space, that we can take off and really get going. But again, the incentives have to be durable enough to get going because it takes 4 years at least, as you know, to build these facilities. And so it can't be 1 or 2 years. So the extensions of 45Z, super important to get these things off the ground, but then they should be able to kind of go on their own, right? As any hopefully good incentive does.
Yeah, no, and it's a good point to look at. This is very much a global market, so it's not just U.S. policy, but European policy. Some of these other places really makes this stable. Okay, we're already out of time, and I got a gazillion questions left. There was one in here about, are there any carbon capture already going on? And I can answer that. Harvestone up in North Dakota at their Blue Flint plant, they've already been sequestering carbon for a long time. Red Trail Energy in western North Dakota, they've been capturing. They recently got acquired by Gevo, who's in this space as well, so that they can kind of tap into that. Harvestone's Dakota Spirit plant, just kind of east central North Dakota, they are working on carbon capture as well. I think already putting it in the ground, maybe capturing right now. A couple plants over in Illinois, ADM in Decatur, Marquise. Do they have it already?
Do they have plans already?
They're not sequestering already, are they?
They are yet.
I think they're working on theirs, though. So Mark West over in Hennepin, Illinois, these plants are located where they can basically drill straight down and do the carbon capture. So yeah, I believe there's those handful or so plants that are able to do it now. Then of course it's the pipelines and everything else to capture it and then move it to those locations. Last thing would be, how are you guys approaching, if the farmers in their climate smart practices are going to be part of this, and there's carbon capture, there's a lot of moving parts. How are you guys thinking about kind of splitting the pie and equitable share of the dollars in this, and kind of a final message to the farmers along those lines?
Oh boy, it's a great question, and I think so important for everybody to be able to benefit in this industry. It's a huge growth opportunity, and we all should benefit equally, right? I don't have a quick answer to answer that question, but I very much believe that we can't do this without you all in the room. You're the sort of the starting point of where this gets going. So very much, I think one of the things that's really important to LanzaJet, as much as what we're doing, more important it's how we're doing it, and going about having really meaningful conversations with growers, with farmers, with producers, to really understand what challenges you have, what questions you have, how we can be helpful in answering those questions, and then also vice versa, how we can continue to partner together to get this industry going.
Kyle, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say that the corn-based feedstocks are just such an easy starting point for us that if we can get the carbon intensity of corn down, I think there is a long marriage there. And to have a marriage like that, you've got to It's got to be a win-win, really. And hopefully maybe that will overcome some of the resistance in Europe to these food for fuel arguments.
Well, I think it's a and all the above, right? That's what all this stuff has got to be. It's all the above. It's food and fuel, and we got all these different things to continue to utilize the demand and stuff too. But I don't know. We'll see how this keeps going. I'm excited for it. I think there is going to be opportunity here, and it does tie down to the farmers are a huge piece of this. As farmers, we need to be watching for this, paying attention to it. It's absolutely going to be continue to be impactful and a huge, billions of dollars of opportunity, like you were showing too, Meg. But anyway, we got to keep moving on. We're going to take a break after we hear from one of our sponsors. But please, everyone, help me in thanking these guys for joining us today.